Before we start off, though, if you have a question during the show, we want to hear it. Your input is a big part of what makes the show great, and we thrive on your energy and insights. Whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion you just have to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that. Use the super chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We really rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit that super chat button, and let's keep the show as interactive and exciting as possible. And if you prefer, you can also go to the gsmcpodcast.net to tip, donate, and leave a comment or question there. We couldn't do what we do without your amazing support, and we're so thankful to have you as part of our community. We do have to start off, though, with Manchester City's stalemate affair with Inter Milan, as they played out a 0-0 draw. They're both opening games of the Champions League. We're not really used to this new format in the Champions League with games being played this early in September. We actually have Champions League games tomorrow as well. Tomorrow, as in Thursday night. We know Thursday night is really known for the Europa League, and nowadays the Conference League, that's their time to shine, the Thursday nights. But for this first opening week, we'll be having Champions League games also in that window, as we'll be previewing Arsenal taking on Atlanta tomorrow. In regards to this game, we saw two teams that are, that are building something steady in this season, trying to both build momentum as they both go after domestic titles. And we saw two teams that really approached this game as this is a marathon and not a sprint. We saw a measured approach from both teams. We know Inter Milan and how tough they are defensively, playing with Acerbi, Bisek, and Bastoni. This was a good defensive effort by them to contain Erling Haaland, who we know we've discussed this, 9 goals in 4 games up to this point in the season. He's been absolutely fire. And Bastoni, Acerbi, Bisek did a good job in being able to contain him. This is the first game that he has not scored this season. That he hasn't scored this season. And so, yeah, overall, good defensive effort from Inter Milan. I thought City did still have their opportunities that they just couldn't get right. I think Gundogan specifically, he had a really perfect opportunity near the end of the game, a winning opportunity there. Couldn't really pick, he heads the ball into either side of Summer. That's the game, that's the victory for Manchester City. He heads it straight into Sommer's hands. And yeah, Inter Milan, they had a few opportunities in transition. They didn't go with Lautaro Martinez, probably resting him for the Milan derby. They didn't play Dumfries as well. They went instead with Darmian and Taremi in those positions. But Inter Milan, they did have some opportunities in transition. They had one really good one where the ball gets played to Darmian. I thought Darmian should have had a strike on goal. They didn't really trust himself from the position that he found himself. Tries to backheel it into the path of Çalhanoğlu. Çalhanoğlu couldn't get quite on the end of it. I thought overall Inter Milan, they had their few opportunities to make something happen of it in transition. Couldn't really find that final ball, get that final finish correct. Overall, and overall, a nil-nil game was probably deserved for both teams. I did think if anyone was gonna win, it was City, which is not hugely surprising with City playing at the Etihad. No, he did. And, it's a good result for Inter Milan being able, with the Milan derby coming up this weekend, not playing a full-fledged first team, playing most of them, but, giving the rest of important players to Dumfries and Lautaro Martinez to be able to escape Etihad with the point against City, who are probably the favorites in the Champions League, the best team in the world. It's a good result for them. It is a good result for them. I thought both teams had numerous opportunities, though. They could have taken advantage of. It was a little bit of a basketball game. This game was. We had some quality shown from both teams. Inter Milan, they were very strong and tight knit in defense, but they were willing to get numbers forward on the break and really go after it, which made it an interesting game. I think Simone Inzaghi set up Inter really, really well to be defensively solid, but also be a threat going forward as well. And they did a really good job, as I said, defending Erling Haaland as well. Mkhitaryan, I forgot about that. Mkhitaryan had a really big opportunity. It was a late opportunity where he just missed right above the bar. He, shot it with some venom. But with the pace, and not close range, but in very good shooting position, and it just went right over the bar. And then I talked about Gundogan, another one, a close range header. That he could have done better on. City had 22 shots to Inter 13, but were only able to manage to get one more shot on target, with 6 shots on target. Then AC Milan, not AC Milan, then Inter Milan did with 5. Had with 5. Now, obviously, also another big factor was, I talked about it, Inter Milan. They had this weekend's AC Milan game to worry about. So, they gave a little bit of rest to a few key players. Manchester City, Kyle Walker, Phil Foden, John Stones, they came out. Phil Foden, he came off the bench. Kyle Walker, John Stones wasn't even involved. Again, talking about a lot of the guys that have had a deep run in the European Championship, had a long run in the summer. They've been really given key moments of rest so far in the start of the season, especially with this game being midweek and that game coming up against Arsenal on Sunday. It was expected that some of these guys would get a rest, and Phil Foden coming off the bench. The thing that I called, though, yesterday that ended up being true was Rodri. Rodri, getting off the mark this season, making his, being introduced this season. He came off the bench against Brentford, but this is his first real cameo, and he started in their opening Champions League tie. And he played the whole 90 minutes, which just surprised me a little bit because, I fully expect him to also start and play the entire game against Arsenal on Sunday. This is a Rodri that's fresh. He's had essentially the first, month of the season off, really. So, we knew that Pep Guardiola, it would have been a little bit of a disservice to Rodri to just throw him into the fire, and in that Arsenal game, in that sort of game, with the two teams battling for, Premier League supremacy. So you give Rodri a little bit of not a warm up, because this is a Champions League tie against Inter Milan, but a chance to smooth into that game. So I did think it was, Rodri would get introduced, and I ended up being correct. Pep Guardiola introduced him in this game, started him, and obviously he played a really good game, as he always does. And yeah, overall with this game, we know the format of the new Champions League, and with 8 games, you do have a little bit of breathing room as well. Now, you don't want to get too complacent, because you want to make sure that, especially these two teams that have high aspirations, not just in Champions League, but in football in general, in terms of domestic leagues and domestic competition. These are two teams that have real high expectations. They want to win as many trophies as possible, and they would want to get into the top 8 to avoid playing 2 unnecessary games in January. They don't want to find themselves in a position playing games that they don't need to play, which is, you play those. If you have to play a playoff to get into the Champions League, you're essentially playing 10 group stage games. You're already having to play 2 extra in this new format. You don't want to put, you don't want to add on another 2 on top of that. It's just, there is a huge incentive for these teams to get into the top 8. But with 8 games, there is a little bit more breathing room. City, they move on in obviously they play Arsenal this weekend. They move on in the Champions League. Their next 3 games are against Slovan Bratislava, Sparta Praha, Sporting Lisbon. So definitely some room there for them to get some points, no doubt about that. Inter Milan, they obviously have the Milan derby coming up this weekend, but in terms of the Champions League, they move on to play Crvena Zvezda, Young Boys, and then they have that big game where Arsenal will be coming to the San Siro. That game would be around early November. That's going to be a very, very, very fascinating game, in my opinion, one of the games of the group stages. So yeah, I think both teams did well to get a point. Obviously, City being at home, they always expect to win. But at the end of the day, you're going up against a really tough team and a really good defense, and sometimes the ball doesn't enter the basket of the net, and it is one of those days. I think these two teams recognize that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and are not too overly worried with one game this early on.